In the play Julius Caesar, William Shakespeare has Mark Antony say the following words: "Cry havoc and let slip the dogs of war." This is an invitation to release the forces of chaos and savagery on the enemy. In the past, such an order could mean releasing actual dogs trained to maul and kill people. In a modern sense, it suggests removing all restraint from the armed forces and allowing them to act with impunity to cause devastation. Letting slip originally referred to allowing eager, bloodthirsty dogs to slip out of their collars or harnesses and go on the rampage. When Shakespeare wrote this over 400 years ago in 1599, his intended audience must have been familiar with the idea of dogs being savage and dangerous creatures when slipped from their restraint. This appreciation of the basic nature of dogs seems to have changed dramatically over the last 400 years. Modern dog lovers, dog worshippers, or dog nutters, whatever you want to call them, paint a radically different picture of what dogs are like. In 400 years, dogs have gone from being man's worst fiend to man's best friend. The dogs of war have transformed into the hounds of love. There are a number of possibilities, but I only want to look into one, and that is deception on the part of dog worshippers. We are all familiar with the characteristics they claim that dogs possess. Some of them claim that dogs love and protect us. I have discussed these two attributes in previous videos and have argued that dogs are incapable of anything resembling human-type love. And I have provided reference to scientific studies that show dogs are motivated by selfishness. Dog worshippers deceive themselves and they deceive us. There is ample evidence in the form of statistics to show the number of deaths and serious harm caused to humans by dogs. Worshippers choose to ignore or manipulate these statistics by deception. If dog worshippers consider dogs of war, they consider them as heroes, creatures that selflessly and altruistically look after humans and save their lives while risking their own. Again, this is deception. A dog will only appear to aid a human if it is rewarded in training to complete a task, or if aiding the human is incidentally beneficial to the dog. For example, a dog barking in a house fire is barking to be saved, not because it is the savior. A dog trained to detect explosives has no more consciousness of saving human lives than an electronic device that fulfills the same purpose. The dog will get rewarded for signaling when it detects a particular smell. It doesn't have a clue why it is doing it. Dog worshippers deceive and deceive and deceive. They will claim that dogs are cleaner than humans, or that dog saliva has some kind of antiseptic or bacteria-killing qualities. They will make these claims for dog cleanliness while responding to television adverts for tick and flea collars, anti-worming agents, special vacuum cleaners for dog hair, and expensive deodorizers that will mask the smell of dog in their cars or homes. What I want to do in this video is to present an alternative history of the dog and human relationship, one that dog worshippers never want to acknowledge, but one for which there is much more evidence than the history they want to offer. They always want to talk about the hounds of love. I want to talk about the dogs of war. By dogs of war, I mean dogs used by a variety of institutions such as armies, police forces, and prison services, and specifically trained to terrorize and attack human beings. Before I go any further, it is important that I explain something. You will have noticed that I used the concept of dogs being trained to attack humans. I know that dog nutters will be immediately triggered by this and will be thinking, she's finally admitted it. She's admitted that dogs have to be trained to attack. Game over. The game is not over. As Sherlock Holmes used to say, the game is afoot. This idea that dog worshippers have of the basic nature of dogs is just stupid nonsense. They seem to believe that dogs are, by nature, gentle, caring, loving creatures that have to be trained or goaded by evil human beings into transcending their nature in order to behave aggressively. This is stupid nonsense and goes against what is scientifically known about dogs. The dog is an animal that agents of repression know that they can rely on to behave predictably and reliably in attacking humans. Dogs are predatory carnivores and opportunistic scavengers. Like all predatory carnivores, violence is their stock in trade, but they don't behave violently 100% of their time. A lot of time is spent resting and not doing much until there is a need for instrumental aggression, mainly to capture and dismember food, but also for dominance, mating, defense, and protection. Sometimes aggression is not instrumental. We read every day of dogs attacking without provocation or reason, but dog worshippers will step in and provide excuses for even the most shocking incidents involving the horrific death of a tiny, helpless infant. Such is their commitment to their manufactured, fantasy-based alternative reality. Domestic dogs have food provided for them. They may even be provided with a mate. Because of this, domestic dogs may have less reason for instrumental aggression than predatory carnivores in the wild. But their natures are still aggressive nonetheless. Dog nutters may want to argue that domestic dogs can have their genetic heritage altered by selective breeding. We have all read the idiotic nonsense that modern pit bulls have had their aggression bred out of them and have evolved magically to become nanny dogs and protectors of the innocent. I get a bit irked sometimes when I feel that I have to respond to the known arguments of dog nutters, arguments that they base on nonsense that they have just made up themselves. Unfortunately, these false beliefs have spread in society and are generally believed by a lot of people, despite there being no evidence for them. A simple way of thinking about it is that any predatory carnivore that abandoned aggressive behavior would lose its primary food source and would become extinct. Feral dogs that live in and around human communities predate and kill children and old people and everyone in between, and they will fight among themselves. They don't return to the natural state of grace that dog nutters claim is their true nature. They do not tend vegetable patches. I had to explain that to preempt comments I might receive, but I feel that explaining things to dog nutters is pointless. It's like pointing up to the moon and explaining that it's not small, it's just far away. Dogs of war are trained, but the training consists of directing and controlling the violence and aggression that are parts of their repertoire of behavior, parts of their nature, parts of what makes them dogs. So cry havoc and let slip the dogs of war. Dogs have been used in warfare for approximately 3,000 years. The first recorded use of war dogs was around 600 BC, when dogs of war were reported as tearing many of the enemy to pieces and putting them to flight. This is an account of dogs as agents of terror. The ancient Romans were recorded as breeding a type of dog called a molossus, especially for combat. In the ancient world, Large dogs were the instruments of shock and awe. Prior to mechanized modern warfare, dogs continued to be used as agents of terror and destruction. The Spanish conquistadors, for example, used large dogs with spiked collars and padded armor to attack, subdue, and terrify the indigenous populations. Christopher Columbus used dogs against indigenous populations in Jamaica and Haiti, writing in his diary that one dog was worth 10 soldiers. One observer of the Haiti campaign recorded that each dog had torn apart 100 natives in the space of an hour. Dogs would be starved before a battle to increase their eagerness for blood, and some would be fed on human flesh to give them a taste for it. Specially bred and trained dogs would be used later in campaigns in Hispaniola, Cuba, and Mexico. Some conquistadors carried out a practice they called the hellish hunting, or la monteria infernal, in which dogs were set on people as an example to others. The dogs would kill and devour these victims. An account in 1553 says Pizarro's dogs were, quote, so fierce that in 2 bites with their cruel teeth they laid open their victims to the entrails, end quote. I could continue with examples from around the world, as dogs were used in similar ways by many other cultures in pre-mechanized warfare. But this should start to lay to rest the mythology of the supposedly gentle and loving species. I can imagine that some dog worshippers will choose to see these examples as evidence of human savagery, not canine. While it is true that this is shocking evidence of human cruelty, it is also true that these cruel humans are only exploiting the natural behavior of these dogs. These dogs of war were willing instruments of human cruelty. They did not have to be trained to be savage and merciless, because they already were savage and merciless. Cruel and vicious humans took advantage of existing natural characteristics and used training to direct and control what was already there. I am not suggesting canine culpability. The dog is merely a tool, an agent of the human, but it is a tool with a purpose determined by its nature. As I said earlier, a dog sniffing out explosives has no consciousness of what it is doing because it is acting according to its nature for a food reward. The war dog disemboweling or ripping out the throat of an Aztec warrior does not know why it is doing so. It is doing what comes naturally. Humans use dogs for savage purposes because they know that dogs are savage animals. As warfare became industrial, mechanized, and long-range, the need for dogs as combatants and terror weapons on the battlefield diminished. Dogs were exploited by the military for other qualities, such as their small size, speed, and olfactory abilities. It is from these types of exploitation that the mythologies of the hero dogs and brave soldier dogs emerge. Dogs are not heroes. I have addressed this issue in previous videos. Please see my video called Dogs Are Not Heroes. I just recently added a link to this article in the description under that video. I recently learned that more than 5 innocent people a week are bitten by police dogs in London, England alone. Please watch that video, check out those links, but I will take the opportunity now to repeat something I said earlier in this video. A dog trained to detect explosives has no more consciousness of saving human lives than an electric device that fulfills the same purpose. The dog will get rewarded for signaling when it detects a particular smell. It doesn't have a clue why it is doing it. The heroes are the humans controlling and directing the dogs. As the traditional dogs of war became redundant in the battlefield against other combatants, their particular skill set remained in use, directed against other non-combatant targets. Dogs will create terror in a man with a spear or a sword, but much less so in a man with a reliable rifle. That target is too hard for a dog. Vicious dogs are too valuable a resource to waste. So these dogs were and are utilized in the terrorizing of softer targets, such as slaves, civilians, and prisoners. In the book 12 Years a Slave, the author Solomon Northup gives this account of his escape from slavery. Quote, I staggered on, fearing every instant I should feel the dreadful sting of the moccasin or be crushed within the jaws of some disturbed alligator. The dread of them now almost equaled the fear of the pursuing hounds. End quote. He was more frightened of the dogs than he was of alligators and poisonous snakes. This dread of hounds is echoed in accounts from both escaped slaves and slaveholders. Here is an extract from the diary of a slaveholder in Louisiana by the name of Bennett H. Barrow. Quote, came across William's runaway, caught him, dogs nearly ate his legs off, near killing him. End quote. Dogs played an important part in the repressive machinery of slavery. Fear of dogs encouraged obedience and discouraged escapes, although not all slaves were stuck immobile with fear of the hounds. Some escaping slaves armed themselves and struck back, killing their pursuing canine tormentors. In the book Slave Hounds and Abolition in the Americas by Tyler D. Parry and Charlton W. Yingling, they state that, quote, the lash and shackles remain two primary symbols of material degradation fixed in the historical memory of slavery in the Americas. Yet, as recounted by states, abolitionists, travelers, and most importantly, slaves themselves, perhaps the most terrifying and effective tool for disciplining black bodies and dominating their space was the dog. End quote. This part of the relationship between humans and dogs is rarely discussed and is certainly never discussed by people who describe themselves as dog lovers. It is perhaps too embarrassing and difficult to contemplate that dogs were used to subjugate and terrify a group of people on the basis of their skin color. It is also difficult, if not impossible, to declare that the dog is the only animal that loves you more than it loves itself after reading this history. I imagine that dog worshippers would make considerable efforts to square the circle on this by claiming that thousands, maybe millions of dogs were somehow coerced and manipulated into acting against their true nature. Claims that dogs are experts at divining human character and know when a person is of bad character are dissolved by a knowledge of history. If dogs are such great psychologists and moralists, why did they not rebel against such usage? I could continue with horror story after horror story of the importance of dogs to the slave trade, but I have said enough. If you have an interest, you are free to read more on the subject. The second group I want to consider is civilians. Trained dogs are essential elements of modern state violence. As instruments of organized coercion, they are the literal teeth of the state. We are accustomed to seeing police and army dogs on TV news reports being used to control demonstrations and quell insurrection. Such levels of animal-based assaults and bloodletting go beyond anything that would be acceptable in human-to-human interaction in all but the most corrupt and repressive regimes. The use of dogs in such situations is a form of torture in plain sight. During the apartheid regime in South Africa, large dogs were used to intimidate, control, and assault citizens who rebelled or criticized the regime. In 2001, 4 police were jailed for setting their dogs on 3 Mozambicans. The incident had been filmed and showed the police officers laughing and joking while these events took place. During the trial, the jury were told that the video had been shown at a number of police parties as entertainment. These events took place in 1998 after the dismantling of the apartheid system, but it demonstrated the continuation of racism within the police force, and it showed a continued acceptance by the state of dogs as instruments of repression. Aggressive large dogs were useful during apartheid, and they continued to be useful after apartheid ended. Some dog lovers listening to this may be thinking that I am talking about man's inhumanity to man, and they would be correct in thinking so. Men of savagery need instruments of similar savagery to ply their odious trade. The dog is always the go-to animal. No other animal seems to fit the bill, and that must surely give you some indication of the nature of dogs. They are not chosen as instruments of terror because they will nanny your children or smother you with kisses or give up their lives for you. They are chosen because they will enthusiastically break your skin, pierce your flesh, and devour you. In his book, The Best Friend of the Murderers, Guard Dogs and the Nazi Holocaust, Robert Tyndall tells us that the number of dogs used by Nazi Germany in World War II was 200,000, compared with around 6,000 dogs in the preceding World War. Dogs were used to terrorize and subdue people deported to camps. They were used to kill and torture people in the camps, and they were used to hunt down anyone who escaped. Dr. Alfred Balakowski wrote the following about his arrival at a concentration camp. Quote, "The boxcars were open, and the SS guards stormed in. Shouting wildly, they prodded us with rifle butts and bayonets, and beat us with clubs, and then they set the dogs loose on us. Those who fell and could not get up were ripped apart. I was wearing a large cape, which the dogs sank their teeth into, forcing me to submit." Again, I could continue to provide illustration after illustration, but I would invite you to read more on the subject of the Second World War and to be more attuned to the role of dogs in that conflict. The final group that I want to look at are prisoners. One ex-prisoner, describing his time in a prison chain gang in the 1890s, said that bloodhounds were the favorite dog of choice in the gangs because of their sense of smell in tracking down an escapee, but also for their viciousness. He also recollected that some guards had a habit of allowing the dogs to chew on a prisoner for a while when they caught up with them. Dogs have been used to control, intimidate, and track down prisoners from chain gangs to gulags and other places of incarceration. This video is directed at those who doubt or are starting to doubt the validity of lies and fairy stories about dogs. I do not imagine that I will make any impact on dog worshippers apart from incurring their predictable anger and their brand of irrational venom. When I was preparing for this video, I came across comments in articles that the savage behavior of guard dogs illustrated their loyalty to their human companion. This kind of stuff is delusional. I also came across views that savage behavior is the exception, and that authors were cherry-picking examples to provide an unbalanced analysis of the true rich and varied greatness of dogs. The only imbalance in the subject of dogs comes from the dog worshippers, who are totally unable to countenance anything that contradicts their unscientific beliefs. You are all at liberty to read further on the subject, and make your own minds up about the true nature of these animals that live among us. The purpose of these videos is to provide information to you so that you can come to your own conclusions about dogs. Once you stop accepting the mythological, supernatural, and unsubstantiated claims about dogs, you will then realize what kind of creatures they truly are. You will then realize that the future has to be dog-free.